Heat is a well-known film from 1995 featuring Robert De Niro as career criminal Neil McCauley and Al Pacino playing the cop Vincent Hanna. The movie was inspired by the life of the real Neil McCauley and Chicago detective Chuck Adamson who pursued him. While many filmmakers are inspired by real-life events, Heat is notable for how closely its writer and director Michael Mann follows McCauley's and Adamson's actions during a series of heists in Chicago in 1964. Let's take a look at Neil McCauley's and Chuck Adamson's real-life exploits, along with their retelling in Heat. Neil McCauley was released from federal prison in 1962 after 25 total years of time behind bars, amounting to over half his life. 8 of those years were spent in the infamous island prison of Alcatraz, with 4 of them in solitary. Before his 1962 release, Detective Chuck Adamson was already suspicious that he would be back to criminal activity when he returned to Chicago. Adamson decided he'd be keeping an eye on him, as the detective believed he'd be putting together a new heist crew. His suspicions proved accurate when McCauley robbed a manufacturing plant, stealing diamond drill bits. This robbery is also portrayed in the movie. Adamson placed McCauley under 24/7 surveillance and discovered that he was indeed putting together a crew. In the film, Al Pacino's character, Lieutenant Hanna, begins monitoring McCauley after Hanna's team of investigators links him to a series of murders. Adamson was watching McCauley and his crew closely, and that led to a stakeout at a department store. The police already watched the criminals perform a dry run, so they knew they couldn't leave anything to chance because McCauley certainly had covered every angle. Adamson had set up officers both outside and inside the store and instructed the 2 who were hiding inside not to move under any circumstances. The detective knew how canny McCauley was, and any mistake would give up the game. Hours went by without an appearance by the criminals, but eventually they did arrive, and they followed Adamson's instructions and remained silent, watching and waiting for the right moment. But eventually, one of the detectives inside the store couldn't wait any longer and left his hiding place to find a bathroom. And that was enough noise to alert McCauley, who knew enough to be suspicious of any unknown noise in a supposedly empty store. He abandoned the job and walked away, leaving Adamson empty-handed. The risk wasn't worth it, despite all the time and money he poured into planning this score. He did gain one thing, though. He knew the police were on to him. Now he had to be even more careful. In the film, we get a tense scene where we see this caution play out. Detective Hanna sets up a sting operation at the precious metals depository when he learns that McCauley and crew are planning another theft. Hanna and his team are waiting in a shipping container, monitoring the heist through a surveillance system. McCauley is standing guard outside the warehouse as one of his crew members drills into the vault inside. Everything is going according to plan, but then he hears a thump. Inside the shipping container, one of the police officers had shifted positions. McCauley's professionalism leaves nothing to chance, and knowing that something is wrong, he calls his team off. Another standout scene in the movie is when Hanna and McCauley meet for coffee, and in real life, Detective Adamson did in fact have this meeting. Filmmaker Michael Mann learned of the coffee meeting between Chuck Adamson and Neil McCauley from Adamson himself when the 2 met in the 1970s. At this point, Adamson was working in film and TV as a consultant, and his first collaboration with Mann was on the 1981 film Thief, which benefited from Adamson's knowledge of tools and methods used by professional thieves. Mann went back to Adamson's career history for Heat, telling the story of the detective's pursuit of McCauley, and he wrote the coffee scene for the film to closely match the real-life conversation that Adamson described. Adamson tells McCauley that he should leave the city, but McCauley simply replies that he likes Chicago. The detective warns the criminal that one day, he'll be there when McCauley is on the job, and McCauley again replies by saying that maybe when that day comes, he'll take down the detective. Either way, they agree. They'll meet again, and the meeting won't be nearly as cordial. The 2 recognize the traits that they shared, such as their relentless pursuit of goals and self-discipline they both depended on to get the job done. Adamson admired McCauley's risk awareness and knew that catching him would require his best work. In the film, McCauley summarizes this attitude when he says he's willing to abandon everything and walk away if he feels the heat around the corner, as he already demonstrated by walking away from the depository job. Adamson and McCauley meet again on March 25, 1964. Adamson and the police were once again surrounding the location they knew to be the target of another job by McCauley and his crew. The store, National Tea, had just received a delivery of a large amount of cash, and McCauley had tailed the armored truck to the location. He and 2 of his crew members entered the store, leaving a wheelman with the car ready for the getaway. Adamson watched from across the street as McCauley held the customers and staff in the store at gunpoint. He instructed the other officers to hold their fire, hoping to prevent a bloodbath. The robbery proceeded, and McCauley left the store with over $13,000 in cash. That's when he once again realized the heat was indeed around the corner. But this time, he couldn't just walk away. Adamson and his partner had their guns drawn on McCauley, and then the shooting started. The criminals and cops traded fire, but McCauley and his people did make it to the getaway car. As they continued to shoot at the police, they tried to make their escape, but the police were well prepared and had every exit blocked. The chase still wasn't over, though, as the criminals left the car and fled on foot, still shooting. 2 of them were shot down right away, and another was injured and later arrested. McCauley kept running, and Adamson pursued. As they predicted when they met for coffee, it came down to these 2 men and all their determination to succeed in their opposing missions. In the narrow gaps between the houses in a residential area, Adamson finally shot and killed McCauley. This final chase is also depicted in the movie, as Al Pacino's detective Hannah pursues Robert De Niro's Neil McCauley at the LA airport. The film dramatizes the connection between the cop and the criminal as Hannah eventually shoots McCauley, then holds the man's hand as he dies. Michael Mann was clearly inspired by Adamson's experience as a police officer in the 60s, telling the story of one of Adamson's famous cases in Heat. Adamson's passed away in 2008, and Mann honored him in the credits of his 2009 film Public Enemies.